Hi folks, today's video is going to be on the worm drive that runs the main arbor. There were two styles that were used. There's pre-World War II and post-World War II, and it shows how designs changed with mass production and industrialization that coincided with World War II. The earlier machines, like this one here, if you watch in here, this shaft doesn't move back and forth, right? The way they adjusted the gear here, inside there, and the quill gear that this thing operates, right here, the way they adjusted the distance between those two gears on this earlier style was they simply ground down the worm screw. And I'm going to show everybody how this is all going together. This cover has shims on it in varying thicknesses and combinations of shims. What they did on the early ones was they adjusted the tapered bearings so that there was no clearance on this shaft that way, back and forth. And then they adjusted the height by simply turning this dimension down slightly until it cleared and ran smooth. On the later ones, they changed this gear and they changed the way they did this drastically so that they could install it in the field without having to actually do anything to this, like turning it down or anything. They simply changed their style and used the bearings floating around and literally adjusted more end play on the bearing to drop the shaft down. I know it sounds hokey and everything, but that's how they did it. There's a other thing, a lot of mistakes people make is pulling out the inner bearing race. This bearing race is captured on this side. It's like a regular wheel bearing assembly. The other bearing on the other side in there. Okay. I don't know why people have so much trouble taking it out. You can literally reach in and pop that sucker out with your fingers or a magnet. Let's see if I can pull it off with a magnet. Unlike your car wheel bearing, this one isn't really pressed in. It's just slid in there. That's how you take the bearing out. It's the same bearing on both sides. You could pull it through this side if you want to spend the time doing that. It will pull through this side. But I don't like to mess around. I'd do it through that side. If I'm going to mess around with the bearing race, I'm going to pull the whole crossfeed assembly out so I could just reach in with my hand and grab it out of there. If it gets canted sideways like that and like wedged in the hole, I made a tool with this special hook that I can go in there and just wiggle it gently with my hands. I've never had to use a tool on this to like force it out of there. I can just go in there and either tap it back in so that it's not cockeyed and then wiggle it out with this little hook. I just ground what is a normal seal hook. I just ground a special tip in there so I could get right underneath the edge, and I'm just gonna like rock the tool and get that. Yeah, I can rock the tool this way or this way and get it to wiggle out of there, but 99% of the time I just reach in and grab the sucker. Okay, so anybody who pulls out The freeze plug that's back there to take this thing out has never done this before. I've never removed one of those freeze plugs, and I would never recommend removing it. You're going to have a leak there, and obviously you don't have much experience with this machine. Leave that freeze plug alone. Don't fuck with that thing. Come on, guys. Now, more on this assembly in this gear. These bearings very rarely ever have problems. On this machine, this gear and this bearing has been around for 50, 70 years, some shit like that, and it's never had an issue. The bearings in here are like, they spin like glass. Normally when I restore these machines, I peek in there and don't have to do anything other than replace this seal here, clean all this up again so it doesn't leak anymore, make sure the seal's in a different location than where it was before because it left a groove on the shaft. Look in there, make sure that everything is clean and there's no chips or anything in the metal. As a general rule, this thing is as reliable as a Ford 9-inch rear end. It just doesn't have issues. 50, 75 years down the road, most of these are still working perfectly. This whole drive, this set of bearings in here, the wheel gear, that whole thing was just bulletproof as can be. If it has an issue, it'll be that stupid nut, bolt, Allen wrench coming loose, which allows this to slide back and forth, right? That clearance there doesn't make any difference because it's almost always driving in one direction only. It's not a problem. This gear has zero wear on it in probably 50, 60, 70 years. This is an old machine that's been running the whole time without a problem. The last part of this I want to discuss is these shims and adjusting this in the machine. All bullshit aside, this paper gasket is about adjusting this end play here. We only need this to be just barely loose. So if you take out all the paper gaskets, this thing's going to be tight in between these bearings and it'll beat up these and still work for another 20 years. But what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to put paper shims in there until this thing turns smoothly without the worm drive shaft against it. It should spin like glass. So you're basically adding shim paper gaskets here until this thing spins smooth as glass. I've done it the few times I've ever had to play with these. That's how we set them up, and they never had problems. This really was a well thought out design. It doesn't have any weak points. This isn't a weak point. It's like so brutally simple it hurts. All you had to do was make sure that bolt got tightened down originally, and it never did come loose. This one did not come loose in probably 75 years. This machine's probably going to work well past being 100 years old. All because this drive was done like flawlessly. They really did this whole drive assembly perfect. It does not really show any signs of wear. Nothing. It was different when they were designing, when they designed this, them boys were getting paid in gold coins. They did a nice job. Anyway, that pretty much covers the whole thing. Thanks for your time. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, put them in the comment section and I'll walk you through this. It's not a big deal. I've done this shit before. Thanks, guys.